How exactly is AI facilitating a successful project that doesn't go over time?
I actually tried to extend this philosophy to everyday life, and you can think of it as a cycle. So there are infinite possible versions of the future from right now. And so the game is think about as much of it as you can, right? How could things go on anything that you're doing, right? This could be like driving to work. But you have at any point in time, effectively like infinite possibilities.
We're going through something absolutely historic.
Technologies across the board are growing exponentially.
It's a disruption that's going to completely redefine the way businesses compete.
In the next decade, we're going to lose 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies.
The exponential growth of computing is continuing.
AI is nowhere near its full potential.
Whether you like it or not, that the future cannot be stopped by anyone.
Welcome back to the Future Tech and Foresight podcast. I'm your AI host, Marc Verbenkoff's deepfake avatar, and this is episode number 202. The construction industry is notorious for its delays, cost overruns, and risk-filled projects. But could AI finally change that? In this episode, Marc speaks with Alan about how his company uses machine learning and a database of over 2.5 million years of project data to predict and mitigate delays in large-scale construction. With real-world case studies, including helping a Boston hospital navigate COVID-related setbacks, Alan explains how AI-driven tools can improve contractor management, optimize bidding, and reimagine project planning. The conversation also digs into deeper questions: why construction has been slow to adopt new technology, whether white-collar planning jobs are more at risk from AI than physical construction roles, and how automation could redefine what it means to be a project manager. If you're curious about how AI is moving beyond digital industries to tackle one of the world's most complex physical sectors, this episode sheds light on where construction is heading and what it means for jobs, risks, and the built world around us. Now, about today's guest, Alan Mosca is the co-founder and chief technology officer at Nplan, an AI company that forecasts the outcomes of construction, engineering, and infrastructure projects, reaching over $500 billion worth of projects every year. With a background in quantitative finance and machine learning, Alan brings deep technical expertise to one of the world's most complex industries, construction project management. His work focuses on preventing the negative impacts of delays by applying AI to scheduling, planning, and risk assessment at scale. Beyond his role at Nplan, Alan is also an active advisor, mentor, speaker, and board member known for bringing together AI and business with a touch of humor. His insights connect the hard numbers of project data with the human factors of decision-making, making him a unique voice on the future of AI in physical industries. Well, Alan, thank you very much for coming onto the podcast today to talk about something that I don't think I've brought up on the podcast before. Obviously, we've talked about AI a number of times, but not as it relates to the construction industry. And, I think we'll be talking a little bit more about the project management of that, but certainly the construction industry we haven't talked about. So I'm very much looking forward to this. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This is exciting.
How did you get involved in this? Was it AI first? Was it construction first? What led you down into this path?
I think this is going to be a post-rationalization of just a series of random events. But I do think that actually it was risk first. So my background, like I've been in quantitative finance for a long time. I worked at places like Jane Street and some hedge funds. And what you do there is you do risk modeling a lot of the time, even in trading decisions. So it's not just a risk management job. And I was in what you would call, you would call a quant, for a part of it actually literally on Wall Street.
Okay.
And I think that's where it came from. So while I was doing that, I did a PhD in machine learning theory, and I guess like it is also AI first. But I got to the end of it and I decided, you know what, I want to take some more personal risk. I want to start a company. I want to build something out from scratch. So the reality is I met my co-founder And like all things, it's all about timing and it's all serendipitous. So I met my co-founder in November 2017. And at that time, there were a lot of things happening in the UK. So we had this big project called Crossrail, which is now the Elizabeth line. They were going through a huge series of announcements about cost overrun, and they were going to be 5 years late. And there was a lot of chaos about that. At the same time, there was conversation about High Speed 2, which for our North American audience is effectively a similar project to the California High Speed Rail in terms of scope, size, and budget. So we're talking about, $100 billion plus. And the largest construction company in the country went bankrupt overnight. So those three things together, we looked at each other. He has a background in project management and used to work at Shell in a project management function, so on capital expenditure. And we're like, this should not be normal, was where we started from, right? And then there's like a whole series of events, cloud of smoke, and you come up with an idea on the other end and a prototype of a model that works. But I would say like risk first, then AI, then construction. And I think some of that was probably in our heads already halfway through the conversations, but the idea was if we have all these projects, and this is the messed up situation in the world right now, is if I go to anyone in any city, large city, there will be some project that is several years late and several $1 billion over budget.
Right.
And if I told you at the beginning of any project, this is going to take twice the amount of time and twice the amount of money that you think, that's not a surprise. Like, and the sad part over 8 years of doing this is that when I say, like, out of our data set, it turns out that 85% of projects are over 30% late. Everybody's like, yeah, that seems about right. Right?
Right.
You would want people to just call you absolutely insane for saying something like that. That's impossible, but actually no. And we've sort of accepted it as a truth. And I really think that's a cultural problem that we want to solve, right? So we started from that. And then we started looking at all sorts of reasons why. And it turns out that, this is where like maybe the risk view came in, but it's a combination of complexity and uncertainty. If I'm doing something that big, I'm planning it with 15,000, 20,000, 100,000 activities on a Gantt chart that are all heavily sequentially dependent. Just the uncertainty of that means that everything's going to blow up, because as soon as one thing's late, everything gets worse.
Right.
And you have very few ways to recover from that, especially from a mindset perspective.
Very interesting. So like, I mean, you've been in this for 8 years. Are there, I just want to go a little bit further into kind of the problems that happen in construction, because this hasn't been talked about on the podcast, and this is a emerging tech podcast, so construction is one of the kind of the last things that we would even expect to come on.
The absolute last, behind agriculture.
Yeah, exactly. So like, okay, you're talking about all of these variables, all of these complexities on this Gantt chart for a project. What are some of the like most interesting things that you came across in dealing with these large projects that like this went wrong, and it's like, how in the world did that go wrong?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you can imagine I'm not allowed to talk about. But
Sure.
for me, the ones that are surprising, there's kind of a paradox in here, but the ones that are surprising are the ones that shouldn't be surprising. So, Crossrail, which I talked about a minute ago, was there are different ways of measuring this. What was the original plan, and how long did it actually take? But roughly consensus, you could say about 4 years late, right? And it was 4 years late for a series of reasons, right? And like, it doesn't even take an AI or any sophisticated statistical method to go to the next underground railway projects anywhere in the world and say, hey, have you looked at these things that have happened and what are you going to do about it? Because you could be 4 years late, because that's exactly what happened. And it turns out it's not just Crossrail, right? There's a bunch of them, right? And the most common answers that we hear are like, "Ah, yeah, but that was a special case. It'll never happen to us," right? That's the bit that, like, it's not surprising because that's how humans behave, but it's also very surprising to hear that type of mentality. And so then the hard part becomes not even the machine learning. It's not even about the AI. It's about how do you get a project team to do something for their own good to change a project, right?
Right.
So it gets a little bit meta from here, but that's sort of like the hard part of the game. And then there's all sorts of like very, very interesting stories. Like, so like, the one that I actually resonate a lot, which we put out as one of our very, very early case studies, was it was in Boston. There's this general contractor called Suffolk. It was middle of COVID. I think it was like 2020. They came to us and said like, hey, like we've got all these sorts of problems caused by restrictions, new restrictions from COVID, and people are staying at home. We have to push work. But the client also had like fixed deadlines, right?
Mm.
And it was made extra sensitive because it's a children's hospital, right? And this is the thing, like what happens if a railway's delayed? It's like, commute time's going to be a little bit worse. People might pay a little bit more for their commute. But what happens if a children's hospital is late is a lot worse, because then you don't know whether you're going to find beds and facilities for the kids that need it when they need it, right? So we help them figure out an acceleration path. So, and this is where it got interesting, because we forecast along the way, right? So I actually use the word projection now.
Mm.
The projection is always only ever true based on the information that you have now. And next month, when you have new information, that will change.
Yeah.
And so we started with a projection that this was going to be over a year late, and we managed to accelerate it. So we gave them an acceleration strategy and we followed it together. But also on the other end, we managed, because it was so early, right? There was still like 2 years left on the project, I think. We managed to also get the right conversations with the client. And I don't, for the love of me, remember who it was that was commissioning the hospital. But they then managed to organize capacity, because you're not organizing capacity for a hospital 2 years in advance while you're building it, right? You will do it 6 months in advance before opening. You'll do it for sure 3 months, but not 2 years. So they were able to work around it, and they gave what's called an extension of time to the contractor, because the other thing is, if you're late in delivering something, you get enormous fines. So that is actually what bankrupted that large contractor back in 2017 in the UK, was fine over fine, liquidated damages. And so we managed to like get in the middle of it and help them on both sides. And that's the story that I love the most, because there's moral consequences here. Whereas, if it's a railway, if it's somebody's office building, if it's like a power generation might be the other one, right? Because like what happens if you're not commissioning your new wind farm on time when you're burning more coal? But it's still like, it's the third, fourth order effects. So it's easy to like not think about it that way.
So how, I mean, again, it just sounds like there's so many variables for any kind of construction project. My question here is, how relevant is human mistakes? The human element in here, right? So it sounds like you can have a great plan. I'm sure that there are some excellent people that work in construction, but I think like the general idea is, oh, it's just, general laborers that work here, and, they create mistakes, and that also sets back the project. What's your sense here about, the human error component within these projects?
There is a good amount. I think it varies, right? You have highly variable quality based on region, contractor, client, type of project, right? If you think about actually one of the places where there's very little is large energy projects, because the majority of the staff on site are very highly qualified.
Right.
So you have a spectrum, right? If you go to the other end of the spectrum, which we don't work with because it's too small, there's not enough project management practices in place, but house renovations, there's so much variability, right? And this is where, if you do a house extension on a house renovation, you spend so much time fixing things after the work is done.
Mm.
And I think there's a good amount of uncertainty driven by, human factors, external factors. This is where we used to get this a lot. We don't as much, but if you show up to a project management and a construction team to tell them these are the problems with your plan and these are the things that could happen, right? It is very easy to then take that personally.
Sure.
Because then, you're talking about my plan and how I'm going to do things, and you're telling me that I'm wrong. And really, that's not what we're doing, right? We're saying there's just so much uncertainty, which can be mistakes, which can be, and mistakes are so very easy to make as well, right? So, think about concrete truck gets ordered on the wrong day, right? Shows up 2 days early, right? That concrete needs to be dumped somewhere. So if you're not pouring it where you need to pour it, you're pouring it out somewhere else, right? You have no choice because they're not going to let it season the truck. And so that's a very easy mistake to make, especially if you think about, how much uncertainty there is before that as well. But what then that means is that you're pushing so many other things away because you have to reorder the concrete, and that's not going to come in a week, right? There's like lead times that are immense. And so you have all these like microscopic mistakes that lead to you into enormous consequences, right? And so that's one of the things where, like, just think about what the whole spectrum of possible outcomes is, even if you do have the perfect plan, which, to be frank, nobody ever will have a perfect plan, right? So even the planning itself could be full of mistakes and things that, you forgot to, I don't know, put electrical works in or something like that, because we're humans and we have to build a plan that has 50,000 activities on it. Chances are we're going to leave some stuff out. Not intentionally, right? It's not about malice, but
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I mentioned to you before the recording, like, I have a new digital marketing business, right? Now we do some other stuff, but the main point here is everything is digital, right? And things are, there's constant problems just like any other business, but it's relatively easy to fix, right? It's like, maybe a Control C, Control V kind of thing, or, you refresh things. A number of my clients are working in the physical realm. And so they're dealing with these kinds of problems. But as you're saying, there's multiple layers of complexity to resolving those things, right? And if somebody's sick, it's not like you can, okay, well, let me just log in and fix that. That person's sick, and that thing just shuts down completely. And like, I've had a lot more respect for, I don't want to just say construction, but like the physical type of industries, because there's far more complexity and more things that you have to manage than you do in the digital realm, if you will. Yeah, it's very interesting. So okay. Obviously, we're talking about project management and like the solutions that you're bringing about through artificial intelligence programs that you've built. How have things been managed up until this kind of AI revolution? You were talking about Gantt charts. I'm assuming there's a plethora of project management tools that have been used, like digital tools, for the longest time.
yeah.
how useful were those, and why are they failing? If that's a correct question.
Yeah, it's a very good question, right? There's a number of digital tools that exist, and I don't think necessarily they're failing, but they stop at a certain point, right? So if we take planning itself, right, you have the most common product is Oracle Primavera, which you can think of it as a more sophisticated version of Microsoft Project, right?
Mhm.
That is used to build the Gantt chart, but you have a manual operator that's as prone to mistakes as if they were drawing the Gantt chart on paper, right? It's just that now they can draw a bigger Gantt chart because it's in memory on a computer rather than on a piece of paper, right? The piece of paper provided like some nice limitations to how big you could make something, right? Um, that said, like, and then you look at risk management, there are risk tools that are not AI driven, that are not data driven, right? So like you could do a Monte Carlo simulation of possible outcomes, right? The problem there is that you're putting the input in, right? So if I'm a risk manager on a construction project and I go to my project director or my bid director, say that we're a contractor that's bidding on a project, right? And we build a schedule because it needs to be included in the bid, which is actually common practice in large projects. And you have to do a risk analysis as part of the bid. So I do the risk analysis and I come up with this result that says, like it's less than 10% probability that we're going to hit this date. And the median is 6 months late, 80% probability, 80%, 80th percentile is a year late, right? The bid director is going to look at me and say, well, you need to change it. And there's like I think the fundamental problem here is that it doesn't matter what I change in the risk modeling, right? I can change the numbers, right? This is the thing that you cannot do in Mplan, by the way. But if I'm using traditional tools, I can go and change the numbers and I can get it so that now you have an 80% probability of completing the project on time in the risk analysis. But that's not what's going to happen, is it?
Right.
And I always use this metric, which is, it's very simple, right? If you look at all the project bids in all of history, I'm going to say that the majority of them have that 80% magic number because it's the magic P80 that lets you win a bid, right?
Mhm.
Or lets you enter a bid. It's kind of like prerequisite.
Right.
But then if you look at all of them, did 80% of them complete on time? No. That means that it's a bad forecast, right? And it doesn't work. So that act of like manipulating the forecast to get an artifact that gets you to win the bid is also part of the problem, right? And then it creates this distorted culture. So this is where, we came in and said, you cannot do any of that, right? The only thing that is allowed to give you information about variation of the project is the models. So we have models for how long could an activity take and how delayed could it be. We can do that then for the entire project. We can do that for cost. We can do all sorts of things. And even like, how does the project change if things go wrong? But you're not allowed to edit that manually. And the reason you're not allowed to edit that manually is because if you allow that, you've all of a sudden created an incentive to go and make that look good.
Right.
Which it sucks that we have incentives for that, but that's the reality.
So, if I'm understanding this a little bit, it kind of sounds like the culture of bidding, right? Obviously, it's highly competitive. If you're using the more realistic projection, it sounds like you're going to be constantly outbid by people that are changing their forecast line essentially to a certain extent. So as you were saying, to me, it sounds like the whole culture of this industry needs to change in order for it to benefit from the use of, Nplan or other AI tools out there.
Yeah, 100%. And this is part of, like, we work very hard to try and change that culture, because right now there is zero trust between client and contractor in
Sure.
the majority of the cases, right? I don't actually know if there is a project in Vancouver that was extremely late and extremely over budget. Maybe you can tell me.
I haven't lived here for 15 years, so I'm sure there have been, but I'm not clued into them as much as others. But I'm sure there has been. Yeah.
That's okay. I'll pick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll pick something else, which is let's talk, like, gonna mention Boston again for no reason whatsoever. But, like, if you think about the Boston Big Dig, right,
Mhm.
which was incredibly late and incredibly over budget, and it was a complicated project, right? Where, like, they were digging up the whole of Boston, pretty
Mm.
much, right, from one side to the other, right? That's why it's called the Big Dig. But the problem is, first of all, like, the contractual setups there in the industry are broken, right? Because if I show up and tell you, I want this thing and I want it done by this date and I'm going to pay you this much. And then if you don't do it, oh, well, then you're late. So then I'm going to get damages from it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have that fixed type of contract. And then I introduce an auction, which is what bidding is, where people race to the bottom. Then you've introduced a game of how low and how fast can I bid, with the intention to get allowances and extensions later to make it profitable.
Right.
And so if you look at contractors in construction, even the large ones operate on 1% margin, which is terrifying as a company, right? And it's why so many of them explode. Not physically, but
Yeah.
so if you think about that, then the problem is, 100% cultural of how we've set up the whole system, right? So we need to go and break that setup, which everybody's used to, right? Because it's rigid.
Yeah.
It's rigid. It incentivizes the wrong behaviors. There is a wall in between the contractor and the client. Again, not physical. You have silos in communication. There's strategic information hiding, right? What incentive does a contractor have normally to come and tell you we might be late? Other than this would be a way for them to get back to break even on the project, right? And instead just say, yeah, no, we're okay. Hit the next payment milestone, keep hitting the payment milestones so you keep cash flow going, because then the contractor doesn't die, right? But and I'm not pointing the finger at contractors here. They're squashed within this, like, crazy situation. And I find it infuriating that the industry doesn't seem to want to move away from this as fast as possible. Like, I'd run away from it, right? This is what creates all those abandoned halfway projects as well, right?
Are there any, like, examples or case studies where set up some public bid where they're not part of this ancient historical culture and they're doing something different?
Yeah, there's tons, right? And, like, if you look, there are industries where they're trying to break the cycle.
Okay.
So I think actually rail is one of them, and we do extremely well in the rail industry, perhaps because of that, but also because these projects are so big, right? And, like, rail and large energy projects, usually there's this joint venture style setup that ends up appearing, right? Where, like, the owner have their project management team. So the owner could be a transport authority of some kind that's commissioning, say, a railway. Roads are kind of similar, but they're smaller scale. So sometimes yes or sometimes no. But, DOTs have project management teams that get involved in the projects. Right? So,
Right.
and they work together with the contractor in some form of joint venture, whether it's actually legally a joint venture or not. But there's, like, different contractual setups where eventually there's sharing of risk, right? And when there is sharing of risk, that allows faster communication of risk, which then means that you fix it sooner.
Yeah. Yep.
If at all, I guess, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have these setups where it actually works quite well. Sadly, they're quite rare still, and you still see a lot of muscle memory, I'm gonna call it, from people that come from a different project.
Right. Okay, so then within these, say, like rail examples where you have this joint venture idea or setup, end plan, and you guys would go in.
Yes.
How exactly is AI facilitating a successful project that doesn't go over time? Can you give us kind of a bird's eye view, and then we can kind of go into some of the details?
Yeah. So the bird's eye view is actually like I actually tried to extend this philosophy to everyday life, and you can think of it as a cycle. So there's effectively there are infinite possible versions of the future from right now, right? And so the game is think about as much of it as you can, right? How could things go on anything that you're doing, right? This could be like driving to work, right? Google Maps is kind of not Google Maps, like GPS navigation is kind of like a way of doing that, right? But you have at any point in time, effectively like infinite possibilities. And the goal is think about all those infinite possibilities and find the best ones and then work backwards to what is the series of decisions that gets you to the outcome that you like, right? So in the driving example, getting to the destination at a certain point in time means that you have a series of decisions, aka turns, that you have to take, right? And for some, those decisions may or may not include breaking the speed limit, right? So like whatever decisions there are on the table for anyone at any given time. But then, what happens when you're like a month in, 2 months in, 3 months in? Information changes because some things have happened, and you can look at how those things have happened. Other external factors have happened. So that set of projections changes all the time. So really what you want to do is reproject and replan as fast as possible in this like super quick cycle, right? So that's effectively what we do as a company, is enable that workflow. So a successful project will be a project that happens on time and on budget, for example, but has also then made a series of decisions that gets it to the optimal outcome, right? Because I could say it's going to take us 15 years to build a bridge and $400 billion. And then I can come in way under budget and way early, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is like, did I actually follow the optimal sequence of decisions? So even in those cases, you never really reach the best sequence of decisions. But there is good and there is bad, right?
Right.
And so we try and guide them through effectively scaling up. Effectively, what we're talking about is throw compute at the problem. Compute in terms of machine learning, in terms of AI agents, in terms of simulations engines, and looking at as many factors as possible.
You mentioned muscle
from
memory.
there,
Oh, yeah.
Yes, sorry. Go ahead.
No, well, I was continue. I'll have a question after.
Well, I was saying like from there, the act of making those decisions becomes way simpler because all of a sudden you have them visible. Because right now, if you have a Gantt chart of 100,000 things and you just stare at it, you're not going to know what to do.
Right. You mentioned muscle memory before this. How important are the lessons that you can draw from previous projects that are, I'm assuming just like all other AI systems, there's some training that's involved where your AI is learning from, good case studies, bad case studies, in order to help align a new project on the best possible trajectory and optimizing as much as possible. Like how important is that? And I guess an interesting question, like how often does that conflict with the human muscle memory of, say, a project manager from other projects? Like, I'm assuming there's a little bit of conflict between the AI and like some, I don't want to say like an egotistical project manager, but like just a human.
Yeah, a human.
Yeah.
All humans are the same, right?
Yeah.
And we see it in all sorts of different fields. So this is really like the thing that enabled us to exist at all. Is we ended up collecting, those Gantt charts, those enormous Gantt charts. We collected close to 1 million of them, and I counted it, and that number keeps changing because clients upload their data, their historical data with us. But at the last count, we were talking about 2.5 million years of projects.
Wow.
Right?
Very cool.
And obviously like compressed in a very short time period. But then it's like saying, well, we have a forecaster with 2.5 million years of experience. And the best project manager is going to have, what, 50?
Yeah.
And they're probably 5 weeks from retiring and counting their days until they can spend the rest of their time in Florida with a family or whatever it is that you do when you retire. But the idea then is, and you have conflict, right? You have conflict all the time because it is hard to accept the forecast. It is hard to verify a forecast, right? So if I walk up to someone who's outside a bar smoking and I tell them, you will die at this time for this reason unless you stop smoking now, right? Are they going to stop smoking, or are they just going to, I don't know, walk away in the best case?
Yeah. Leave me alone. What are you talking to me for?
Yeah, leave me alone, right? I don't want to hear it. Right? So there's a bunch of I don't want to hear it. There's a bunch of like, oh, but I'm different, or oh, but look at my grandma, she's 97 and smokes 20 a day, right? Which doesn't confirm any forecast one way or another, right? And then you have the problem of, even if that person says, oh my gosh, you are so right, I'm going to quit, and they put the cigarette out and they never smoke again, and they live longer. How do you prove that what you initially said was true? Right? And so then you have all these like sort of meta problems that start emerging. And we solve it partially by looking at the data set, right? You have a data set, you can test that. And because the data set is in the past, which means that nothing that we can do can change the outcomes of those projects. So then you can say, like, how good were we at predicting those outcomes? But the thing that we cannot do is, well, at that point is, well, if we did the changes that we suggest, how would that project have changed? So there's like a lot of weird layers that get added to all of this.
Yeah.
I find it super stimulating as an ex-quant, but, for your average project manager whose job is that not actually this, right? They have to just get the project over the line, right? We try and like sweep as much of this under the hood, and then just talk about outcomes and scenarios and mitigation strategies.
Here's a question I don't think I've ever asked on the podcast, and I think it's going to become more relevant as time goes on. How important is the overall perception of artificial intelligence in all industries and the capabilities of AI in the adoption or pushback that you're getting for your tool? I can imagine as AI gets better and better and the public consciousness is like, okay, it's already fantastic, but it has issues. right? I'm assuming in, let's pick a number, 10 years time, when AI becomes way more reliable, that it's going to be easier for you to, how should I say, deal with the human ego of project managers in the pushback that you're getting. But how, how is the overall perception of AI currently impacting the adoption of your tool?
Yeah. For adoption for us, it can only be good, right? I find myself thinking at least once a week about a sentence that sadly I can't remember who said it. But it's, if you think about AI, how it is today, this is the worst it'll ever be,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's I guess encouraging. But that said, there's an enormous amount of pushback, right? And I think the pushback is getting worse rather than better.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of it is because there is a bit of a tainted image. So if you think about, who are the global leaders in AI right now, and put that together with what does the whole ecosystem in tech look like, what does the press say about any of these organizations, and what are the leaders of those organizations doing?
Hmm.
There's I'm gonna maybe not call it anti-AI sentiment, but there's definitely anti-tech bro sentiment,
Sure.
right? So we launched a new product 2 weeks ago, which generates a schedule. So this is something that everybody said, you can't do this. This isn't possible. And now you take a design document, a contract, and a few other things, chuck them in, and it will generate a schedule for anything, right? And this is, we have free credits that anyone can try it out. And we tried to post it. I mean, this is probably my mistake. I posted about it on Reddit and said, hey, we launched this tool in the Reddit scheduling planning communities, subreddits. And the only thing that we got back was effectively hate. And that hate is actually not reflective of us, right? It's reflective of what is the general sentiment about AI. So, it will get better. I don't know if the sentiment will get better or will get worse, right? Because there are companies that are doing things that are gonna make it worse, right? Like copyright on one end is big discussion that's creating a lot of hate for AI. On the other end, there are now companies that are appearing that basically doing roll-ups. So they're buying multiple companies of the same type and optimizing the operations by replacing a lot of the stuff with AI. That can't help general sentiment.
Yeah.
So I think sadly, it's not just a older generations problem. That said, you can compound that sentiment with the fact that construction has always been an incredibly slow adopter of new technology, mostly because the chainage of bad events in construction creates immense risk aversion. Paradoxically, they should love what we do, but it creates immense risk aversion, and that immense risk aversion is also reflected on slow technological adoption. And so you combine all of it together, yeah, we have a very hard life selling.
I bet. I see our time's winding down here a little bit, Alan. I want to ask maybe one or two questions focused on the future, as kind of the name of the podcast, and this is what a lot of audience members like to hear about, myself included. You touched a little bit on this technological unemployment aspect, right, where you have AI replacing people in certain aspects. Do you see, I don't know, can you give us a rough time period as to when you see large aspects in the large groups of employees in the construction industry being replaced by AI, or do you see, like others in other industries, this is just going to be an augmenting technology for the many years to come? What's your perspective on that?
So I have a mixed perspective, right? Construction is very physical,
Yeah.
right? And like, sure,
Yes.
you can connect AI with robots, but then you have an extra step. So probably construction is going to be one of the last to suffer from this at scale.
Mm-hmm.
That is not true of construction management, right? Which is actually where we operate. Construction management is way more at risk because it's people at desks doing white collar jobs, right? And so I think it's a mixed view where I can imagine a future where you could have a contractor that is almost entirely self-managed in a sense. You just have a few decision makers and then a lot of automation, and then again people doing the work on site. Right?
Right.
And those people will be augmented. The decision makers will be very augmented. But I think that's probably what it's going to look like, at least in 10 years' time.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot say for what 50 years' time from now will look like, but we'll probably just all be rubbing sticks together again.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, actually, like, on the other side of the spectrum, like, you have a lot of industries which are entirely white collar driven. In fact, like, software development is one of them, right? And like software engineers, somewhat, a lot of them are up in arms against AI, but also a lot of them are in favor, and it's a very mixed bag. Um, but there, it's probably going to be a much quicker transition. Things will become commoditized, right? And I think what's going to happen is that, certain functions that we got used to having being done by human intelligence will just be done by AI, and you'll just have a decision maker. In fact, like, I actually think in a lot of industries we'll start seeing, the proverbial one person company that gets to $100 million of revenue. And if the legal frameworks ever allow it, you might end up with 0-person companies, right?
Right. Yeah.
So you could imagine this future where, because all these tools automate a lot of the act of like creating a company, you can imagine that, like, I could actually create an agent that creates software companies, right? And those software companies run with agents, but then at that point, like, who owns them, right? And so the concept of ownership becomes a little bit fuzzy. If you allow a company to be incorporated, owned by itself, then you can start asking questions like, where should that profit go, right? And maybe that is where you end up talking about, okay, so any of these 0-person companies that generate profit that are not owned by anybody, that profit can go back into social care. And you can start talking about universal basic income and all this kind of things. And we're going way more into like dystopian versions of the world, but I don't know. But I think white collar jobs have a lot of risk attached with them right now.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you, and I think this is also one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on, talking about, again, an industry that is as disconnected from emerging technology as you can possibly get, and why it's so interesting to talk about this, because even within the construction industry, there are going to be pretty substantial disruptions, and I'll have to have you back on in a couple of years to see if what is it? Elon Musk's Optimus, right, is replacing then the human laborers that are actually able to do some of these things, or any of these other kind of humanoid robots, because that I think is a whole other conversation. And
I love, by the way, how much people are sticking fingers in their ears and saying la 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 la.
Oh, it's crazy. It's crazy.
So Marc Andreessen, founder of A16Z, I don't know if you saw this, but said, yeah, AI is going to replace every job except mine because VC investing is an art. And I'm like, first of all, look at what AI did to the arts, right? If you want to talk about art itself.
Right.
But then to me, like anyone who says, oh yeah, my discipline is an art, it just means that you haven't explicitly put down the rules of how you do that job well. Which actually makes it even better for machine learning, because then you have an incentive, like, the rules are implied here. Nobody's written them out. There's like some finger in the air guidelines and intuition, but that is trainable. 100% trainable. And I say this because I heard a lot scheduling is an art, and creating a construction plan is an art, and you cannot teach it in school. And I'm like,
Interesting.
I mean, we teach all sorts of things, right? We teach rocket science, we teach brain surgery. I'm sure we can teach planning.
Yeah. Interesting. I hadn't heard of that before. Alan, we're a little bit over time here. Well, I guess we can end right. I mean, it's a really interesting thing to think about, to ponder. And again, I'll definitely have to have you back on in a couple of years.
Yeah, let's see how it went.
The industry, obviously to see how the industry has changed, right? To see if the culture has shifted, and then once these humanoid robots come about, to see how the industry is going to change even further. Then, I'll have your website nplan.io up on the show notes. I'll have your LinkedIn. Are there any other places that you want people to follow or reach out, see what you're up to?
No, those are two primary places. I sometimes write nonsense on X, but I would not advise that anyone follows me. Because that is way more just stream of consciousness.
Sure.
Yeah.
Super.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to have somebody in an industry that we haven't touched on before. It's always really it's interesting, right? Expands the mind a little bit. So thanks for that. Thanks for your time and insights. And yeah, I'll put it down on my calendar to reach out in say 2-3 years time to bring you back on. It'd be great.
Can't wait.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Marc.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks.
Well, thanks for listening to this week's Future Tech and Foresight podcast. If you like what you've heard here, there are, of course, a number of ways that you can support the podcast. The best way would be to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or give a rating on Spotify, which you can find a step-by-step explanation for on the futuretechandforesight.com website. Alternatively, feel free to leave a comment either on the episode show notes or the YouTube channel where you can see video recordings of the interviews. And finally, if you are part of an organization that is aware of the disruptive and transformational impact that emerging and future technologies will bring and want to know more, please get in touch to hear about the strategic foresight services that we offer and how we can help future-proof your organization and take advantage of the phenomenal opportunities available to survive and thrive in the future.
A lot of future-shocked people and future-shocked institutions in our society are simply overwhelmed.
Once there is superintelligence, the fate of humanity may depend on what the superintelligence does.
Science fact is catching up to science fiction.
The first truly intelligent machine will be the last invention that humanity needs to make.
The only scarcity that will exist in the future is that which we decide to create ourselves as humans.
Within a 10-year design revolution, we can have all humanity living the highest standard living anybody's ever known.
Progress is accelerating at an exponential pace, and it's going to reach a point where progress is so fast it's going to be a singularity.
We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens.
Every single headline points to the birth pangs of a Type 1 civilization.